I want you to imagine that you're at a birthday party and they're handing out the slices of cake. The host presents you with two plates that you can choose from. One has a skinny piece and one has an extra large piece with extra icing. Which one would you choose? Now, if we're honest with ourselves, unless we're really on it with the diet, we'd possibly choose the bigger piece. My favourite cake is the Colin the Caterpillar cake from Marks and Spencer's, and almost everybody wants one particular piece. That is the face, because it has the most amount of chocolate on it. One day, Jane and Will came in from school and wanted a snack. Their mum had baked a pie earlier in the week, and there was just enough left for each of them to have a slice. Let's have a piece of pie, suggested Will. I'll get the pie while you get the glass of milk. When Will sliced the piece of pie, one slice was much larger than the other one. Jane poured each of them a glass of milk and sat down at the table. Will brought the pie and placed the small slice in front of Jane and kept the large slice for himself. "Look what you've done," cried Jane. "You gave me the small slice of pie and kept the big slice for yourself." "Well, what would you have done?" Will asked. "Well, if I were serving the pie," said Jane, "I would have given you the large slice and kept the smaller slice for myself." "Well, what are you complaining about? That's exactly what I've done." Will and Jane both laughed and began eating their pie. Well, there are lots of times in our lives when things might not seem fair. And believe it or not, that's actually a good thing for us. Sometimes. Sometimes we might feel that we don't deserve the things that happen to us. Well, in the gospel lesson today, there are some people who felt very upset over something that had happened. Jesus told this parable, a special story with a meaning, about a farmer who hired workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the first person a certain amount, let's say £50 for the work of the day. A little while later, he found another person who wanted a job and hired him for the same amount of money, and then found another and another worker and let them start labouring as well. He even found someone who jumped into the job in the last hour of the day. The owner gathered everyone together at the end of the day, and each worker received their £50. The first workers, understandably, were upset because they didn't get extra pay for working longer. But the owner said that he could do what he wanted with his money, and everyone would get the same pay. In today's world, we sometimes worry a lot about things being fair. We think we earn or deserve the things we get, and we can get upset if we think we've been cheated or mistreated. Maybe arguing about who gets the last biscuit in the tin, or complaining that our brother's ice cream is bigger than ours, are not actually the things that we need to get upset about. There are bigger injustices going on in the world that we should take note of. We are incredibly blessed in this country to be able to walk into a supermarket and buy what we want. We may not have much money as our neighbours, but at least we have a choice that we so often take for granted. How would you react if you walked into a supermarket and there was nothing on the shelves? We had a glimpse of that at the beginning of lockdown, when people were bulk buying toilet rolls and eggs and sugar and flour. That was the experience that I had when I lived in Zimbabwe. There were times where we didn't know where our next meal was coming from. God knew what we needed and when we needed it. I've never met more generous people than those who share their last cup of flour or the little food that they have when someone arrives on the doorstep. And they do it without grumbling or moaning or often being asked. Now, the evangelist J. John tells this story of a man at an airport who had some time before his flight, so he buys himself a coffee and a bag of mini donuts. He looks around for somewhere to sit, and the only seat he can find is opposite another man reading a paper. So obviously before social distancing. He goes over and puts his coffee on the table, puts his bags down, takes off his coat and sits down. He takes a sip of coffee, opens the bag of donuts, takes one out, eats it and puts it back on the table. The guy opposite then stretches over, picks up the bag of donuts, takes one out and starts eating it and smiles. As you can imagine, the other man cannot believe what he's done. He cannot believe that he's just stolen one of his donuts. He picks up the bag of donuts, takes another one out, starts eating it and moves the bag closer to his coffee. While he's having a sip of the drink, the other man stretches over, picks up the bag, takes another donut out and smiles and then pushes the bag back. The other man still cannot believe it. He's stolen 2 of my donuts, he thought to himself. The man gets up to leave, and the other man thinks to himself, well, it's about time, the donut thief. He puts on his coat, picks up his bags, and then picks up the bag of donuts. He sees that there's only one left, breaks it in half, puts half of it in his mouth, and the other half on top of the bag on the table. He smiles, waves, and walks off. After a while, he looks at his watch, and it's time for him too to leave. He gets up, puts his coat on, and bends down to pick up his bag and finds on his bag is his bag of donuts. He was complaining that the man was stealing his donuts, when actually the other guy was sharing his donuts. The point is very simple. God owns all the donuts. Every week, God gives us a bag of donuts, and inside there are 10 secular donuts. How we spend our money, our donuts, reveals what is important to us. How would we feel when God asks us to give one of our donuts away? When we give one of our donuts away for something that is sacred, something that is God-filled, something that God asked us to do, we always find that there's always enough for what we need. God is good and generous, and he has given us, most of us, more than what we need. The question is, what will we do with what God has given to us? Will we share it with those who don't have as much, or will we be greedy and keep it to ourselves? We all have a choice to make with the things that we have. Even if we have very little, we can still share with those who have less. So this harvest, I know that we are not presenting our produce or our gifts to the front of church, but I'm going to encourage you to take some of the things that you might have taken to a harvest festival and put them in the box outside the vicarage for the food bank, because that supports people who have less, people who cannot afford a full meal for their family. And later on, Steve's going to give us an update on what the food bank is doing and where it's at. Let's just spend a moment of quiet thinking about what we can do with our donuts. And then I'm going to hand over to Rachel for our prayers.